those people, for that American nation that we all love, is to re-elect Donald J. Trump, President of the United States.
There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices.
Welcome back to America Decides, the election programme brought to you by the journalism students here at the University of Northampton in partnership with the students of the University of Richmond in the USA. I'm Tom Harrington.
And I'm Fran Roche. Who will be the 47th President of the United States? Democrat Kamala Harris or Republican Donald Trump? Stay with us for the details.
Counting is now underway in almost 40 of the 50 states voting tonight. Most states vote the same way, election after election, but there are 7 which flip-flop, and they could determine the election outcome.
Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania in the Rust Belt.
And Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina and Georgia in the Sun Belt.
Georgia in particular is being hotly contested, with Kamala Harris welcoming the stars during her campaign. In some breaking news, yet more bomb threats have been registered against places where Georgians have voting. This may be an attempt at voter suppression.
Meanwhile, just breaking over the last hour, Donald Trump is projected to have won Florida and Alabama.
We've looked at both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but what about the 2 men vying for the number 2 slot of vice president?
Should anything happen to the winner in office, it is the vice president who takes over the presidency. They are literally a heartbeat away from taking over.
And the man hoping to serve as vice president to 78-year-old Donald Trump is J.D. Vance. Our reporter, Jack Davis, has been finding out more.
The former president's pick, and it is J.D. Vance, the 39-year-old freshman senator from the state of Ohio.
From author to Republican senator, Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, was a choice that America was not expecting. He is pushing forward their views into the mainstream media. Things like immigration, where they claim that more needs to be done about criminal, quote-unquote, illegal aliens.
Re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations.
Their thoughts on abortion, where Trump and Vance believe that individual states should decide their own take on abortion.
Voters in those states make decisions. We, of course, want the states and the federal government to respect those decisions, and that's what President Trump has said, is consistently, we need to get out of the culture war side of the abortion issue.
And a brighter future for economy with the return of common sense economic principles.
Trump is president for a second term, a golden age of prosperity for Arizona and the whole country, but we got to get him there first. Thank you.
But Vance did not always have his heart set on being a politician. After seeing firsthand the difficulty of living in working class America, Vance wrote his bestseller, Hillbilly Elegy, which puts his hometown, Middletown, Ohio, into the light, so he could challenge politicians in 2016. That included his now colleague, Trump. After the first assassination attempt of Trump, Vance still found a way to spin it to promote his leader.
Democracy. Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy. What the hell have you done?
But do Americans think that Vance, a once anti-Trump fan, is the best person to help carry out his ideas?
We don't trust J.D. Vance to order donuts. We certainly don't trust him to take seriously lowering costs. He is so busy spreading misinformation and lies about what is at stake for this country.
Nice, not. 17 years of government experience, 17 months of government experience. Animal lover, cat lady hater.
Yet Vance's determination is clear. He certainly wants to.
Send Donald Trump back to the White House.
We apologise for the technical difficulties there. Immigration has been a massively divisive issue throughout this election cycle, and it has been for so many in the past.
But how do Americans feel about immigration, and are the candidates reflecting their views? Alison Stacey is an archaeologist from Washington, D.C.
It's really interesting because I would have to say I've seen crazy things down at the border. And I mean violent things as well. So like down in Arizona, that is an entirely different immigration problem than me being, like, I lived in New York City for a bit, and that was nothing until the governor of Texas put a bunch of immigrants on a bus and shipped them off to New York and dropped them off the side of the road. That's where And I mean, they were lines upon lines. 42nd Street was just covered with people who had blankets and backpacks. And I was just walking in the work and I'm like, this, like, if I was somebody down in Texas, and my family's there and my house, and this is just a bunch of people on the side of the road, gosh, like, I can only imagine, like, I know cities of El Paso and right along the border of Arizona, it's always like that 24/7. And I can understand their perspective of pushing for a tighter immigration control. And that's how they get that's how the Republicans get their vote, is because they're paying attention to the immigration. I don't want to call it a crisis, but it is kind of a crisis, both in a good way and in a good way and a bad way. Like, I want America to be taking in these refugees and these immigrants from unsafe places. However, there's not enough space.
Perhaps the biggest controversy of the 2020 election came not on the election night itself, but in the violence which followed. A mob of Trump supporters, egged on by the man himself, stormed the Capitol on January 6th, claiming the election had been stolen. There are fears that those scenes could be repeated. We now go to Jimmy James from the University of Richmond to hear about the importance of a peaceful transfer of power. Good evening, Jimmy. So can you provide some context surrounding the idea of a peaceful transfer of power, and how does it factor in this year's election?
So this concept of peaceful transfer of power did not have much weight to it until the 2020 election. It's always been sort of an understood practice that the incumbent president would accept the results of the election and sort of pass the torch in a peaceful and respectful way. President Obama did not align with President Trump's political views, but even then, on Inauguration Day in 2017, the Obamas walked side by side with the Trumps, as the Bush family did when Obama took office. When Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016, she said this following the results, quote, "Last night I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country. I hope that he will be a successful president for all Americans," end quote. So peaceful transfer of power was always the norm, not the exception, until 2020, when election results were not accepted by many. Just take January 6th and the storming of the Capitol building. That's sort of the most recent example in the United States history of what a hostile transfer of power looks like, with President Trump not attending President Biden's inauguration and thus failing to set that precedent.
And what does this year look like in terms of a peaceful transfer of power?
So it's hard to say or speculate about what this year holds, as 2020 was such a switch up from the expected peaceful transfer of power process. What can be said confidently, however, is that news outlets will be covering this idea of a peaceful transfer of power quite heavily in the coming days with this election cycle. How things will ultimately shake out, if there will be a possibility of a peaceful transfer or not, etc. Donald Trump was quoted earlier today in an NBC video today, quote, "If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it," end quote. So that is something to be mindful of, but this will be a topic over the coming days, and especially come January, when the inauguration is set and the transfer of power will actually take place.
Thank you, Jimmy. And now moving on, so politics affects everything, including sport. But how does sports affect politics? And what happens on the pitch impacts the wider world? James Logan took the field to investigate the relationship between sports and politics.
Across the world, sport is seen as an escape from day-to-day life. And there's no country in the world that does it bigger than the US. Whether it's the NFL, NBA or even MLS, tens of millions of people tune in every weekend for the excitement of which is sport. So there's no surprise that it plays a factor in this election.
I think people just love to go to sports. I think after the election's over, people are going to be going to all the bars and watching sports just because they're fed up with all this election back and forth. It'd be a good release to just go and watch a game, Especially the Super Bowl is going to be pretty much soon after the inauguration in January. I think at that point, people are just going to be like, "Yeah, we're done with elections. Let's get back to watching the sports." And of course, we've got the Olympics coming to the US. In 2026 too, so I think there's going to be a big push to get that up and running nice and well, and the World Cup's coming to the US as well. So I think there's going to be a big push towards promoting sports for sure.
But sport in the US has a problem, and that problem is politics. For many, it's a platform to show off their skills on the pitch, but for others, it's a way to get into deeper and darker conversations. Nick Bosa here, showing his public support for Trump.
And so when there are injustices, whether, I don't feel like they should be endorsing political parties publicly on the pitch. But the end of the day, they are individual people, and so I think in their private life, on their own socials, they certainly should be free to endorse whoever they want. Just like, for example, I think the whole Colin Kaepernick taking a knee thing back in a few years ago, that was interesting because that was a protest for the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, and things were going wrong, and I think at that point it came to a point where people were being ignored so much that he felt he had to do that. Whether it's appropriate or not, I'm not sure, but it certainly sparked the conversation. And when you've got that kind of platform, it is good to be able to use that platform, but not at a detriment of the enjoyment of sports for the paying public.
34th Olympiad, 2028, Paris 24, Los Angeles 28.
A rich Olympic history spanning back to Athens in 1894, success for the US does not come without its controversy. Tommy Smith's Black Salute in Mexico 1968, a public show of defiance, not just against racism in the US, but in the sporting world. Since then, black athletes such as Michael Johnson, Simone Biles, amongst others, have shone on the world stage. And with the world stage turning their eyes to LA in 2028, it's a chance for the US to show its best side. James Logan, UON News.
Over the past several elections, a growing gender divide has emerged in the United States, with men more likely to vote for Republicans, while women tend to vote for Democrats. We're joined in the studio by our reporter, Oziel Kabadi. Oziel, how stark do you think the gender divide is this time around?
So the gender divide is quite significant this time around because, as you said, Trump has more of an advantage with the male candidates, whilst Kamala Harris has more of an advantage with the female candidates. And whilst both of them are trying to gain votes from both genders, the stakes for women are definitely more higher this time around.
And what's driving the divide between men and women in politics?
So what's driving the divide between them is the fact that women aren't a fan of Trump because Trump doesn't support women. He's clearly a misogynist, he is also sexist, and he's even been seen to talk about women inappropriately in the public, despite women's reproductive rights being such a leading issue in this election. His own VP has also spoken about Kamala Harris and has called her trash. He himself has also talking about Hillary Clinton and has told her to lock herself up. So he's clearly not for the women and is causing a major divide in the politics.
And how big of a factor do you think abortion has been in widening the gap between men and women and who they're voting for?
Abortion is definitely a big factor in itself because this is the first election since the Supreme Court has overturned the Roe v. Wade in terms of abortions and protecting abortion rights. And it's really significant for Americans and women in this election as well.
Thanks, Oziel. We're getting closer and closer now to every state closing their polls. Once that happens, all we can do now is wait for the counts to roll in.
Projected victories are coming in, with Trump being projected to win early states, Kentucky, Indiana and Virginia. Kamala Harris, meanwhile, is believed to have won Vermont.
None of this is a big surprise, but it means we're getting closer and closer to finding out who the next US president will be.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will be in just as much suspense as the rest of us.
I doubt they'll be getting much sleep tonight, but then again, neither will we.
Follow our election coverage on X at journalism_UON.
Join Dante and Janique for our next bulletin in 45 minutes.